Yo Vikings, and welcome to something a little bit different from what I'm used to doing. So normally I've been playing video games or reading, and now that I have finished the first book in the Ruins of Apprentice series, I thought I would talk a little bit about it and share my opinion. So please bear in mind I study mechanical engineering, not any language or humaniora or classic literature or anything like that. The only experience I have is high school and elementary school, but yeah. So this review opinion based thing is gonna go through some different sections. So it's gonna go through the overall plot with a summary, and then I'm gonna talk about themes and my opinion on the story. Then we're gonna talk a little bit about the world, then the villain or villains, depending on how you look at it, the main characters, and then we're gonna conclude it. Also, I'm gonna go through a summary of the entire plot, so if you want any spoilers, you should skip to the number on the screen right now. Yeah, I think that's what we're gonna do. Alright. Yeah, so onward to the overall plot. Alright, so for talk about the overall plot, I'm gonna start with the summary, and let's get it in. So the book starts with the prologue explaining about the big bad guy Morgarath and how he controls and trains walkers, but we don't really get any more exposition other than he lost and he's somewhere evil and he's doing evil things. But the story itself is about Will, who is an orphan. He's raised in a castle along with some ward mates called Horace, George, Alice and Jenny. They're all very simple. Horace is a warrior, George is a scribe character, Alice is a diplomat courier, and Jenny's a cook. While Will wants to be a warrior, he's not good at it. And the story itself really kicks off at the so-called choosing day, a couple of chapters in, where the orphans gets to go where they wish if the master of the place wants them. So for instance, Horace wants to be a knight, so the battlemaster Sir Rodney has to accept him, which he does, and all of them except for Will gets into their houses, or not houses, school places. Yeah, they get what they want. They're Gucci. So Holt the Ranger takes in Will as his apprentice instead, which Will is a little scared of because everyone's scared of the Rangers, but it's good. What problem is, Horace gets bullied at the school because he is an orphan, while Will gets training. We don't hear about the three other ward mates, but so Will and Horace gonna be our main characters. Horace gets bullied a lot, so he gets of course very grumpy, and he takes it out on Will. It is festival thingy. Now, later on in the story, Will and Holt finds a wild boar and decides to call in Baron Harold, who is the local baron, and his battlemaster Sir Rod. They bring in Horace because Horace has shown exceptional natural talent and wants to treat him. And there, Will saves Horace, who saves Will, who saves Horace, or something like that. You know, it's kind of convoluted, but it ends up with Horace being, oh wait, Will is not a bad guy. Afterwards, Horace finds out that the bullies thinks Will made a fool out of him, so they start bullying him more, and then they go after Will to teach him a lesson. Luckily for Will, Horace and Holt comes in and saves the day last minute, which makes a perfect bond for both Horace and Will forever, and also brings in Holt more of a likable character. By now he's only been this meanie mentor who no one really likes. Afterwards, some time passes and Will has to go to something called the Gathering, where he has to take his first test to advance as a ranger. However, this is cancelled, and Crowley, the Ranger Corps commander, sends Holt, Gillen and Will out to hunt. Gillen is Holt's old apprentice and is now has his own fief. Every ranger has a fief when they are done. That's why there's 50 fiefs and there's 51 rangers, because Crowley is like the leader, so he stays in the main castle. So they're sent out to hunt something called the Kalkara, which is described as being half ape, half bear, and can kill people really easily and stun them with their eyes, and they're very flammable but thick skin. They track the Kalkara. Holt realizes in order to kill the two Kalkara they need backup, so he sends Will to fetch Sir Rodney and the Baron Harold. And when he arrives at the castle, he airs his suspicion that at this point they think the Kalkara might be hunting the king, because Morgarath, the big bad guy, has gone after the commanders and stuff. But he has a personal vendetta against Holt, because Holt was the ranger who led him to his demise. So he thinks the Kalkara actually sent to kill Halt and not the king. It is shown later to be correct. Baron Errol and Sir Rodney the Bellmaster follow Will to the Kalkara, where they find it injured. Errol and Sir Rodney kills it or finish it off. After some intense action where Halt tries to distract the Kalkara, hurts its eye with a knife, and basic heroic stuff, Will's the only one standing and he realizes, wait, they're really weak to fire, so he puts fire on his arrow and shoots it and kills the Kalkara, which ends up him getting permission to join battle school instead of the Ranger Corps. But he decides to stay as a Ranger instead of becoming a Knight. And then there's the prologue telling the story of Will's father, which for the story itself isn't really important. It works more as background exposition, so therefore we will not be in this review focusing on it, but it is a pretty sweet ending for it, and it kinda expands the characters a little bit. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about it, you'll see. Alright, so after having talked about the plot, what are some themes in it? Well, this is a children's young adult book, so of course the main theme is gonna be growing up and finding yourself. And this is shown as in Will and Horace kinda have to grow up and figure out who they are in this world with kinda everyone, and the choosing day really symbolizes, because it shows you have to figure out who you are and what you're good at. However, this book deviates a little bit from usual is, oh, main character want this, main character's good at it. Doesn't really work out that way. Will is not good at being a warrior, he's not built for it, and he doesn't want to be a ranger. I mean, having read the book, I'm like, of course you would want to be a ranger, that cool. He's good at something else, and that's very important for a children's book, to show children that just because you're good at something else doesn't mean it's bad, and it's because you want to be something not necessarily the best for you, and that's not a bad thing. It also shows a very important message about bullying, because it shows how horrifying it can be for a character and how it can ruin friendships, because even though Will and Horace wasn't friends per se, Horace was friends with all the other wardmates, and it really ruined his friendship with them that he was bullied so much. So it shows the horror of it, and it's kind of a good moral. Next section I'm going to talk about my opinion on the book. So what is my opinion on this book? I think it's a very simple storyline. But again, it is a children's book first and foremost, so it's very important that the story is not too simple. I enjoy that it's not a high fantasy that makes it kind of stand out more from other YA or children's books. It grounds it a bit more in the historical fiction. I mean, there is some magic in it, but I kinda don't like it. I also enjoy how it's teaching these lessons, but it's not being too on the nose, like, oh, look at this, look at how people are, I don't know, being mean and how that ruins people's lives. It's just like, no, it shows a very human response to being bullied. It shows a human response to not getting what you want, even if it's what you're good at, and that's an important lesson to teach children. And I think that it does it really, really good. Now, the little magic they're like controlling the war girls, or the actual creatures like the walkers and the Kalkara, it kind of feels out of place because John Flanagan has removed so much magic. So in my opinion, the book would be better if they were just barbarians or mercenaries and the Kalkara were just mindless assassins. I think that would have made the story a bit more fluent and feel a way more working together, because it feels out of place when there's no more magic. Other than that, I actually think the book is really, really good. It sets up an interesting world, it's simple, it's straight to the point. I like it spends way more time on showing of building of this Ranger Corps than it actually does in the Kalkara. The Kalkara is more like, we need something to show that Will has grown, and that's what they are there for, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a second. But overall, I like the story. If I could give it a score from 1 to 10, it would probably be like a 9-ish. Yeah, a 9. In this section I'm going to talk about the world, and the world of this is set in is the Middle Ages of England, Europe, but mainly England. And that it works really well in it. It allows John Flanagan to expand a lot, explains about the Scandians in the north with like mercenaries and Iberian, which we don't know anything other than Holt has an accent from there. But it grounds everything in something most people can understand in a classic medieval England. However, of course, there are modern tropes in it, like the women's rights and jobs and their importance in society is not like that in the real history. And that's an important fact. The book is not going to teach you any proper history. It's just going to set in a world where we all can imagine what's going on, which he uses a lot because he doesn't do too much world building. He doesn't go into too much detail about what the world society is or anything, just the basic structure, because you can fill in the blanks that there are your farmers, then your knights, and so on and so forth. He doesn't need that. Then the stone flutes was pretty on the nose for an allegory for Stonehenge, and I think he felt forced to add something like that since, it's in England, but I think he should just have made it like this eerie place with wind constantly and just remove the stone flute. He's going for this eerie feeling, and I don't think the stone flutes adds enough. So in my opinion, he should have removed it, but other than that, I think the choice, also for the story, that it's a low magic setting, why not put it in some kind of historical-esque setting that everyone is familiar with? Yeah, that's kind of my description of an opinion on the world. Next up is the villain. When it comes to the villain, you can kind of say there are two villains, kind of. There's the Kalkara and Morgorath. And if we start out with Morgorath, I can imagine him being like Lord Voldemort from Harry Potter, basically. He's this looming evil that we don't get to see right now. And there's really some things that I think are the same, like people are scared to mention it. But whereas Lord Voldemort is like, oh, he who shall not be named. Like, they're trying to make him bigger than life. And I think in Harry Potter setting, it kind of feels weird until when they actually hex the name Lord Voldemort. But until that happens, I think it's kind of annoying. Whereas here it's more like, oh, he's just that scary. We're afraid to say it, but we kind of have to. Then there's of course the Civil War part, where kinda Lord Voldemort did a civil war in the wizarding world, trying to get rid of non-purebloods and stuff. And most people doesn't think he would come back in both books. So in this case, Morgorath is kind of like, oh, he's driven to these foreign places, even though we know he's alive. We don't think he's ever gonna come back, other than when we have to teach our children to behave. And the same in Harry Potter. People think he's dead, but he's not. And that's a big difference. We know that Morgorath is not dead, and we know he's plotting, so we are always on the edge. And that gives him a bit more of urgency than Lord Voldemort does. Because Lord Voldemort, we don't know he can come back. We just know he can do stuff. I think that works really well for this book, is giving the characters some more urgency to figure out just what's going on to stop the Kalkara. Because they know if they don't do it, when Morgorath returns, it's gonna be bad. Whereas in Harry Potter books, it's always gonna be an if. So yeah, then the other villain is the books kind of villain, the Kalkara. I like the different, interesting idea. Of course, there's a lot of inspiration from the real world in it, with the eyes, and certain prey animals can do that to prey animals. I think they're really good first villain overall for Will to overcome, because they're not busted, but they're strong enough so everyone is afraid. It sets up Will's cunning and his training to be good, but it leaves it more to like chance he kind of wins. It's kind of because it's not by him, and him not killing both of them but only one of them makes it seem way more realistic that, oh right, in spur of the moment he remembers it. Now, when it comes to their weakness, fire, I have seen people have mixed opinions on it. I like it, and I know they know it's flammable, and it's never explained why they didn't use it. And let's say there's two ways to look at it. Either it's something they apply, or it's something they secrete. If it's in both cases, it doesn't really matter, because we have to think of where they're from. They're from a place where they are the top dogs, and that means they don't have to be scared. Also, out here in the mountains of rain and darkness, something like that, they're not really civilized, so I can't imagine that many people are using fire other than Morgorath. So why should they be too afraid unless they venture out of the mountains, which they only do when they're paid to do it. Which is very good, like giving them this, they are smart, but they have a clear problem mentally. Why would they work for Morgoth? Well, they really love silver. That's a simple explanation that it works. Now, the only problem is, of course, Morgoth has been exiled, so how does he have money to keep them? But you could probably imagine he brought some of his treasure with him, I don't know. Yeah, I think that's about it. We don't really hear enough about the walkers to have an opinion on them. They seem more like just your generic grunt and just need it. And Flanagan just need an excuse for them to not be too smart, I don't know. But Morgoth sets up a good overall villain for more than one book, and the Kilkara is a really good introduction to Will as a character and show his growth. So in this last section, before we conclude this little analysis, review, whatever you want to call it, we can talk about the character in the book. And we're going to do it in a specific order. We're going to start with the wardmates, which is not going to be including Horace and Will. Then we're going to talk about Baron Eld and Sir Rodney, then Gillen, then Horace, then Hall, then Will. Alright, so let's start with Will. Well, not Will, the wardmates. So they are all one personality traits. Well, all that are not Horace and Will. So George likes law, Jenny likes cooking, and Alice is very diplomatic. And that works really well, since they're not going to be that important for the book. At least not this book. Because it is a children's book, and you just want to establish them and give them some character to make the world feel more alive. What's actually interesting is George gets a character arc, because he starts from being this character who stumbles over his words and is not really good at talking when important people is around, to never shutting off, according to Alice. And that's a good little thing. Ginny and Alice doesn't, but they don't play a big role in this one. They probably will play a bigger role in later books, so maybe there they'll get. Although there is, like in the very last couple of chapters, some with Alice and Will, some hint of romance and stuff like that, and it sets up Alice as being a more of an important character. But we're gonna have to see what's gonna happen. Now, talking of Baron Eld and Sir Rodney at the same time, we're starting with the Baron. He's for a Baron, he's not superly historically accurate because, you know, the women's thing I talked about in the world building. But he's a likable character. He works well to explain a lot of exposition. He's definitely meant for an exposition character, but also to like give the world more living feeling. And also he kind of works like a father figure for all of them until Will gets old and so on and so forth. But he's like this, it describes this larger than life character, always happy, and that works really well for him. It shows that even though you are important, you doesn't have to be an ass about it. So talking about Sir Rodney, he's more the stereotypical battlemaster knight you could imagine in a fantasy book, and that is because that's what the reader's gonna be expecting. So he's kind of forced into this role, but there's still, you know, the thing that he's not dumb, and that's very important for this character Sir Rodney, to show he's not dumb, because that makes him stand out a lot from other young adult children's books. That he's just not a dumb knight, he knows a lot, and he sets a really good tone for what to expect knights to be like, at least if they're trained by him. And he works really well for being a mentor for Horace, because he also seems to have this natural talent-ish, but it's also like, if you have natural talent, you gotta work hard with it. And that works really, really well, because again, it's a lesson for children. If you're naturally good at it, you should work, and if anything, you should probably work harder with it, because you need to develop it, or else you're gonna be tired of it. Now, Gillen is 100% made to be a foil to Holt, because he is the opposite of Holt in every way. And that's really good, because he shows Will that just because you're a ranger, you don't have to be dry and sour and all that stuff like Holt is. You can be smiling, happy, talkative. He also expands Holt as a character, because it shows that Holt has a lot of in the past, and it gives, you know, Holt a reason to show he cares about stuff and gets into the world a little bit. So Gillen in this book works more of expanding Holt than being an independent character. So when hopefully we see more of him, well, I know the rest of the series, so when we see more of him, he is gonna become more his own, and that's gonna be exciting. When it comes to Holt, he's definitely a father figure for Will, and he is a mentor for Will at the same time, when he's the strict mentor one, but he's not a reluctant one, since he did choose Will, which kind of makes him a bit different than most strict mentors, because usually the reluctant mentor is the very strict one, but this one is here. And the funny thing is, a lot of the time the mentor will be too old to do anything of the things the main character has to do. That's not the case here. Holt is able to do everything Will is being taught, and can stand his own, and can handle all the problems more or less, but he just needs, someone to take over once he's getting too old, because I could imagine Holt is like in his 50s by now. So taking it and look into the middle-aged world and all that, he doesn't have that many years left before he has to retire or before he dies, so he needs to find someone to take over. Now, Holt is definitely, just like Baron Errol, a way of creating exposition, because Holt establishes a lot. He introduces to the Scandians, he introduces to Herbaria through his accent, he introduces to the Ranger Corps, to Morgoth, to the entire storyline with that. That's kind of funny, because he's also very meta in a way, because we as the reader are gonna have a lot of questions, and Holt doesn't like that. He doesn't like we ask so many questions, so it's very meta way of doing it. But it works really well, because that doesn't make it seem like Holt only exists for that, but he exists as a mentor who just knows a lot of world stuff. And therefore, whenever he does give exposition, it carries way more weight. Now, through Gillen, we also see how much Holt cares about people in his life. Even though he doesn't show it, he cares a lot. The last character before Will is Horus. And Horus is a foil for Will. He is everything Will isn't. He's tall, he's strong, and he gets into battle school, which is what Will is. Will isn't tall, Will isn't strong, and he doesn't get into battle school. But at the same time, he also shares a lot of traits with Will. They're both caring, heroic, and smart. And that's really, really important to show. That just because you are a knight, again back to Sir Rodney, you don't have to be dumb to be a knight. Because even though he's a foil to Will, if they have to develop the friendship they have later in the book, that they don't have in the beginning, they need to have some traits, and it makes sense they're both caring, heroic, and smart, because they both want to save and protect people. Now Horus does get a full character, because he goes from being kind of like Will's bully to be a best friend and ally, and I know it's through all the bullying Horus gets, and then the Will and Holt stops it, but it works really, really well. Now, last character is Will. He's of course the main character, but for a children's young adult he's not that stereotypical, since he isn't big, strong or warrior like Horus is. And he wants to be a knight, not a ranger, but he's kind of quote-unquote forced to be a ranger. Now, normally the problem is that if a character knows too much, he would be introduced to a world he doesn't know. In this case we know nothing of the world, but Will doesn't really know much either, since he's grown up kind of sheltered through the What Made Rod program, and that helps us a lot, because whenever Will gains any kind of exposition, it doesn't come off as, oh here you go reader, here's some stuff. No, it comes more of, here you go Will, now you understand what's going on. And he does get some character development, however it's very, very slight. Well, it feels that way, but it's actually quite a lot, because he gets very brave, and he gets very strong for his size and for his job, and he gets very skilled as a ranger. But we're shown it through glimpses here and there, like the fight with Horus, where it's shown he can stand up to Horus. Well, admittedly because Horus was drained of energy, but there we show he's brave. You get to see it, the instance with the second boar, how he's fast thinking and he's caring and heroic, and also his strength. And we get to see at the end again, he's using his skills, he's thinking, he goes, oh wait, I have something on my bow tip, I'm gonna have to aim a bit higher to compensate. And that's really good, because he teaches children that even if you dealt a bad hand per se, in this case you're not becoming what you want to be, it's not a lost situation, it's still a really good situation, and you can make amazing things of it if if you just work for it. Because in case just because this isn't what you want, it's not what you're naturally good at, and that's okay. And that's a good thing to teach children, that it's okay to not have the best hand. Coming back to all the theme stuff, the last part we're going to get into is the conclusion. So in conclusion, when it comes to this book, it is a really good book, especially for children, and it's a very strong entrance to this storyline and series in general and universe. It's a simple story, it works really great. The world is also a very simple world. It's not like reading a Tolkien-esque fantasy where everything is gone down into little gritty details. No, it's just adding enough to be interesting, but not so much that a new reader is going to be tired of it. And this is definitely a story that's more character driven than it is driven by the story itself, since the actual problem in the book only kicks off in the last third of the book, if not last fourth of the book. And that's both weak point and a strong point. I would have liked to see the Kalkara do more, like give a bit more of urgency, but at the same time that would also risk ruin all the other stuff, like the training stuff that's going on. So it's a bit of hit and miss. I can see arguments for both. I think for this book here it does it really well, but I think for future books definitely should bring in some more urgency from the villain and the bad guys. So yeah, but I would definitely recommend this book to anyone wanting to get into a more low magic but still fantasy. Yeah, it's a good book, and we're gonna go through the rest of the series after this review. We're gonna take on book 2, so look out for the prologue for chapter 1. I don't remember if book 2 has a prologue. Oh, it's just making a lot of noise. There we go. So book 2 does have a prologue, and yeah, my name is Lightning, and I'll be signing out. Goodbye.